Hey Sparks, it's Jessica. I hope you haven't forgotten about us yet. We miss you like crazy, and it's been probably a crazy week because school's been canceled, hasn't it? Yeah, I hope that you played outside a little bit because the weather is so nice. It's very sunny. Feels like summer, right? We probably skipped spring, didn't we? Yeah. But I want to tell you something. It doesn't matter where we are in the whole entire world. That's not going to stop us from having Awana and from spending time together and learning more about Jesus. So every single Friday, I'm going to send you a video of a lesson and I want you to listen to it. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an activity to do after. So it's not always going to be me. It could be Christina, it could be Tima, Danik, Julie. You'll see. But make sure you listen. Okay? You ready to start? Me too. Today we're going to be talking about the story of Daniel. And I know some of you might know who that is and what the story is, but not everyone. So let's learn about it together, okay? Make sure you take out your Bibles, like I have my Bible, to the book of Daniel. I want to read it a little bit. You ready? So part of God's story, which is in the Bible, is about a guy named Daniel. And it goes a little bit like this. So Daniel was a Jew, which means he was part of God's special family. But when he was a young man, a king named Nebuchadnezzar, let's call him Nazar, he came in from the city of Babylon and he took over. He chose the smartest, the strongest, and the most handsome Jewish men to leave their homes and come work for him in his palace. One of those men was Daniel. Even though most people in Babylon, they didn't follow God, Daniel and his friends did. So they had to figure out how to obey God and the king at the same time. For starters, they had to go through a training program where they were fed royal food. So all they could eat was that really nice food from the palace that the king served. The problem was, the king Nebuchadnezzar, he only offered the idols, which are the false gods, that fancy food. And since Daniel followed God, he didn't want anything to do with idols. He only wanted to worship one God, the true God. So Daniel had an idea. He asked the chief of the king's staff if him and his friends could eat vegetables and water for 10 days. Just vegetables and water. He said that if they got too skinny or too weak, that they'd eat something else. But God, guess what? He made them even stronger than the royal men who ate the fancy food. And God gave Daniel extra understanding too. So here's how they're eating with all that fancy food. And it was Daniel and his 3 friends. And guess what? They never got skinny because God took good care of them. So God also gave Daniel, he gave him very, very good understanding. So that means he was the smartest in his whole class, top of his class, and the king really liked him, which was hard to have. But guess what? A few years later, the king had a nightmare. Nobody knew what it meant. Not the wizards or whatever, the wise men, all those people. Nobody could figure out what his dream was about and what it meant. So he also asked Daniel, and Daniel was the only one who could tell him what it meant because he asked God to show him what it meant. And everyone loved Daniel, even the king. He even said that Daniel was pretty great, which was a big deal because the king didn't even think about God before. So now the king's kind of thinking about the real God, which is good. But soon, he made it hard to follow God again. For Daniel, at least, because the king built a huge gold statue of himself that was 90 feet tall. 90 feet tall. And anybody who didn't bow down to it would be thrown into a furnace, which a furnace is just it's like a room with a lot of fire in it. But here's that statue. So everyone had to worship the statue. And if you didn't, you'd be thrown into a furnace. And now that means that Daniel and his friends were in trouble. And their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They told the king, "The God whom we serve will save us. We're not going to bow down to your statue." So they got thrown into the fire. And pretty soon, the king, he really liked Daniel, so he was sad that he had to go into the fire. But he was looking, and he saw 4 men just walking around in that room of fire, which that's impossible. So it was Daniel and his 3 friends, and they were just walking around. An angel of the Lord was protecting David's friends and Daniel. So they got out alive, and they didn't even smell like smoke. That's a miracle. So God was protecting them. God didn't stop them from getting punished, but he did go through with them. The king had never seen a God who could rescue like that. So do you think he kind of believed in God a little bit? Yeah, he did. Afterwards, King Nebuchadnezzar, never mind. He didn't change. He still wanted to worship other gods. So God sent the king another dream, and Daniel told him what it meant. King Nebuchadnezzar would live in the field and eat grass like a cow for 7 years. In other words, he'd go crazy until he realized that God is the only one we should worship. Kids, God doesn't want everyone to worship whoever they want. He only wants him to worship him because he's our creator. Anyway, Daniel, he kept working for other kings of Babylon, even after Nebuchadnezzar. And God continued to help him understanding dreams and visions. And even though he had to give a lot of bad news, Daniel did excellent work, and he was very well liked by the kings. In fact, one king named Darius, he liked Daniel so much that he got jealous, and they tried to get Daniel in trouble. But they knew the only way to do that is to make a law against worshiping God. But hold that thought. Remember when I told you? The fire? Look. They should have burned, but God, he protected them with an angel. So now that these people are jealous of Daniel, they want to get him in trouble. So they made this law that they can only pray to the king and no one else. They can't pray to God, or you'll be punished. And the king made this law, and he felt very important. Everyone prayed to him, only to him, and anyone who disobeyed would go to the lion's den and be eaten by lions. So Daniel what do you think he did? Was he just not going to worship God anymore? No. He still prayed to God, not to the king. And Daniel kept praying every single night to God and not to the king. And when the king found out, he was sad because he really liked Daniel. He didn't want to punish him. But now that there was the law, which he was tricked into making, he said, "May your God whom you serve faithfully rescue you." And guess what? God did. So David, when he was thrown into the lion's den, and he was not supposed to survive, but guess what? God again protected him. He sent an angel to shut the lions' mouths, And Daniel served 4 important kings and he followed God. But whenever it came down to obeying God or the king, Daniel chose God every single time. That's amazing. He chose God every single time, no matter what. And even though Daniel had to do some really hard things, God was always with him. There's our Daniel in the lion's den. He's okay. So that's the story of Daniel. And just in case you missed it, here's kind of the nutshell of it. Daniel was taken to Babylon, and he asked for vegetables and water, which God made him strong. God gave Daniel understanding, and Daniel's friends obeyed God instead of the king, but they got punished, but God rescued them. Daniel understood more dreams, and he was the king's favorite, so others got jealous of him, and they got him in trouble. So Daniel obeyed God, and he still obeyed God instead of the king, and guess what? God rescued him again. Daniel served God no matter what, and that's a part of God's story.